Oh, let me tell you something. Busting makes me feel good.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Blockbusting, the podcast where we love to hate the movies. I'm your host, Jay Light. Joining me today, it's Erika Curry.
Hi, hello, how are you?
I'm good. The last podcast to ever be recorded in 2020. That's what we have the distinction of being right now. If someone's doing a podcast later than this on December 31st, they're making mistakes.
I don't want to know them.
Can you imagine? I guarantee there's somebody out there who is going to do, there's probably multiple people out there who are doing like a New Year's Eve podcast recording on the actual like New Year's Eve night. They're doing it. They're hanging out with their friends. They're doing a Zoom party, but it's going to be recorded for posterity just because it's like, oh my God, this is so wacky, guys. We're here. But we're not here. Wow.
Whoa. Yeah. It's a bit indulgent, if you will.
Absolutely it is. But hey, what about what a perfect segue, because we're talking about a movie that's super indulgent.
Super indulgent.
It's Adam Sandler, Seth Rogen, Leslie Mann, Judd Apatow, Funny People. Funny People from 2009, American black comedy drama film written and directed by Judd Apatow, starring all the people who I mentioned, along with Eric Bana, Jonah Hill, and Jason Schwartzman. The film follows a famous comedian who is diagnosed with a terminal disease and tries to fix the relationships in his life while befriending an aspiring comedian. Now, this movie, you came to me pretty much immediately with this one. This was the first one on your list. Why? What's your beef with it?
I find it to be super indulgent. The performances are incredible. Like, I cannot speak to one person's performance that's not impeccable, but it feels like Apatow just, I hate to use this term, just like jizzed indulgence into this film and then just let them run wild with it.
I mean, that's the most Apatow-y writing that Apatow didn't even do, is saying somebody jizzed indulgence. That's classic Apatow right there. You could probably write his next one. You could write the Queen
I'm ready
of
for the
Staten
banter.
Island. Yeah. Get ready. We're going to do this one loose, all right? Just don't worry about the script on this whole podcast. We're going to just take it hot. Yeah, okay. Man, it's very interesting talking about this movie because I remember watching it in theaters in 2009. I had just started doing stand-up. I was in college. I was really like, you know, I was a big fan of Superbad and Knocked Up and 40-Year-Old Virgin. And then I watched this and I was like, oh, this is what doing comedy is going to be like. It's going to be like you go to the clubs but also like you get to hang out with the famous people. And that'll be very cool. And I hadn't watched it since I was 19 years old. And it left such an indelible mark on me when I was 19. I watched it again right before we did the podcast, and didn't. It's not there still.
Yeah, I also watched it in college in the theater. I was like one of the first people to see it in our small town of Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I had started doing stand up as well. And I was like, well, this will be the movie that like motivates me to leave this small town. This will be the rocket ship. And this is what LA is going to be like.
But you know, I think you came around on not liking it faster than I did, obviously. I mean, you're the one who brought it up to me. And I told you when we were messaging about doing the show that I'm a Funny People apologist. Because I'm sort of a Judd Apatow apologist a little bit. I know that I feel the same way about Apatow that I sort of do about Chris Nolan, where like his movies are too long and they're obviously very indulgent. And I know what I'm getting into when I'm watching one of those movies. But there's something about him that I still generally tend to like. And watching Funny People again, it's just like the spark got lost. What was it like for you when you lost the spark of being like charmed by this movie?
I didn't like it in the theater.
Oh, right from the jump. Okay.
Right from the jump. And I actually liked it a little bit more on second viewing, having been, I feel like, grizzled and hardened by LA for a decade. Like it wore me down a little bit to where I understand Seth Rogen's plight a little bit more. And I definitely understand the Adam Sandler's character a little bit more as well. I found myself being more of like, coming out here, I was definitely like the Seth character, just trying to do whatever to make it, to do, trying to do everything by the rules. But then I find as I get older, I'm a little bit more like the George character, where I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to say exactly what I want to say in any moment. And I'm going to do what feels right instead of trying to please everybody. Mm-hmm. And so when I didn't like it then, I just felt like the women were kind of treated as like objects of like prizes. Like you are awarded a prize if you do well.
Right.
And like none of the women really had autonomy. And that like struck a chord for me early on.
Yeah. None of the women in this movie really have any sort of autonomy or agency other than, oh, well, in the case of like Leslie Mann's character, I am this woman who like I'm the one who got away, and I'm gonna ditch my husband and my upend my life just for you because I trust this relationship that we built when I was the coat check girl at the Improv. And then in the case of Aubrey Plaza, it's literally like I am this woman who is being bet on about when she's going to have sex with Jason Schwartzman versus Seth Rogen.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that just to be like, even then I was like, ooh, that feels icky. And even more so now, knowing just like the influence that any celebrity can have, just the minors of celebrities and the graces that they have with the public. And it just felt icky to me.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely... I mean, this is the moment, I think, for Apatow as a filmmaker where he's starting to try and turn away from necessarily doing, like, the heavy bro-y comedies, right? Like, that was what he got known for doing. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't know if he felt like he needed to leave some of that sort of bro-iness in there in order to keep his audience intrigued in watching a movie that is ostensibly not a very... at that stage, Apatow-y kind of movie, even though now we can recognize, like, oh, this is the kind of shit he does all the time.
Yeah.
Right? He's making movies about sad people, mostly sad men, who are juvenile, and you're going to spend way too much time looking at what these guys do. But at the time, it's just like, I think, I don't know, it's hard to pin down what I think about this movie right now. Because I think... I used to be like, this is the thing. This is the one. This is like his peak of his filmmaking. And now I'm not so sure if this was... I kind of just wish we had Judd Apatow, who is making like bro-y frat pack comedies.
Right. That is what I enjoy the most from it. I mean, I love Freaks and Geeks, so I was like an early adapter, but I felt like Freaks and Geeks did a better job of like materializing heart than this film did. Right.
And I think, I mean, you have Paul Feig there to also attribute some of that to, which is great. I think, there's another show that Judd Apatow had worked on, the college one. I forget the name of it.
Oh, yeah, it was only like
it was like a season or two. I watched it in college. Hold on, I'm gonna look this up before it escapes me forever. Undeclared.
Undeclared, yeah.
Yeah, I watched Undeclared, and there's a lot of the similar tropes that are in there, where it's like the men are juvenile and the women are basically just like prizes or objects. They don't really have autonomy at all as characters. But it's very early career Apatow, right? It's a very early kind of vibe. I think Freaks and Geeks marries some of that like headiness and the sort of coming of age framework. You know what? I think I just figured out what it is. Have you seen King of Staten Island?
I watched parts of it. I haven't seen the whole thing.
King of Staten Island, I enjoyed. I think what made King of Staten Island work, now that I really am starting to like think about it and unpack it a little bit more, is it's hard to make coming of age movies about people who are middle-aged.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what Judd Apatow is basically doing. He's like making sex comedy coming of age stories. But all the people who are coming of age, except for the characters in Freaks of Geeks, Freaks and Geeks, Freaks of Geeks, that classic, classic Paul Feig story and Judd Apatow, Freaks and Geeks, Undeclared, and King of Staten Island, all are actual coming of age stories, and even to some degree, I would say 40-Year-Old Virgin is the closest to like a proper coming of age story, even though it is literally about like a 40-year-old man. Right. And then you see that's just what Judd Apatow does the entire rest of his career. He's making coming of age stories about man children.
Which I enjoy. And I feel like I'm somewhat surrounded by man children in
That's comedy for you. Yeah.
It's comedy. It's like people that don't do the work, people that think half of work is just showing up. And that's what a lot of people do here is just show up, but they're not prepared. They don't have the prowess to know like the other half is the hard work. And I love the characters in his stories and how they like have to understand, like you have to do the work. Right. But they get there, but it's fun. And like, it is indulgent at the beginning when you're just watching their like, just a cog spinning without touching any of the other cogs for like a long time. It's a lot of,
I think it's really weird talking about this movie from a standpoint of like not liking it as much as I did the first time and just feeling kind of disappointed by it. I think what it really feels like is exactly what you're saying, where it's just like you're watching these people. And when we were younger and we had watched it in the theaters, we watched these people and we were like, oh, well, like, you know, maybe you didn't like the movie for the elements that you didn't like about it. And I liked it for the reasons that I did like it. But now we've both been out here so long that we see the same thing in this movie. Like we've both kind of reached equilibrium. We're like, you see the characters in this movie as the people who you know in real life. And I see the characters in this movie as the people who I know in real life. And there's a sadness to it that I'm recognizing now. And there's an acceptance of it that you're recognizing now. And and an appreciation of it that you're recognizing now.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I think like loneliness is such a theme throughout like this film. And just understanding like how lonely this community is in a true sense. Like, I think it was a brilliant point where he was like, those are just people I know. Right. Those aren't my friends. Those are just people I know. And I was like, yeah, I have a shit ton of people I know.
Oh, same here. I got tons of people who I know.
Oh, I got a ton of people I know, but I have like very few friends.
My closest friends are people who don't do comedy.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're normal people.
Yeah. I feel like there are so many comedians who don't hang out with normal people. And I think there comes a time when like you've been around comedy long enough where you start to have a really hard time hanging out with normal people.
Yes. There's like a curb.
Yeah. And I don't know, what was that like for you? Like, where did that moment happen for you in real life? Where you're like, oh, I don't really have normal people in my life anymore. And you have to figure out how to deal with that.
I mean, just the ribbing around, the joking that people do with each other, and understanding, like, you know, like kind of the busting of balls that happens just constantly, and like turning something that is tragic and jarring to other people into like a comedic experience or something that's funny to me.
Mm-hmm.
And just when you tell a story and you're like, listen to this awful thing that happened, hoping to get a laugh, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm like, no. Like, you're supposed to think that's funny, because
Right.
that's how I have to deal with it. That's how I have to process. And if I'm going to think things in your life are funny that you don't think are funny. And it was definitely a hard realization around, I would say around year 3, when I had like a group of girlfriends and I was like,
Your life just fell apart. Like whatever.
My
just fell
life
off your
just
desk.
fell apart, just like this desk just fell apart. I had a group of girlfriends that I was like, these are really good people, but they don't we don't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand me. I don't necessarily understand them, but there's like a familiarity and a loyalty that I have to them because they've been such good friends. But like we don't speak the same language.
Right.
And with comics, you speak the language. Even if you don't like each other, you speak the language.
That's what one of the things I've always appreciated about comedy is that you can travel and meet other comics in other cities, and you have that shared language. You know what you're on the same page from the jump, no matter what. And I've found that it's so much harder to develop that. It's just like the immediate rapport that you get from being around other people who are involved in comedy or who do comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an element of like, I think, like you said, the performances in this movie, I think, are particularly Adam Sandler's performance and Leslie Mann's performance. I really appreciate it. And Eric Bana. I think Eric Bana is doing a bang up job in this.
Yeah.
It did just occur to me while I was watching it that Eric Bana and Carl Urban are two different people. I did not remember that for a while. And then I was like, oh, where'd his beard? He must have grown a beard and gotten fat for The Boys. And no, it's just a whole different guy. It's a different man.
It was jarring to hear his Australian accent, knowing that that's like his actual accent, but it doesn't seem like it should be coming out of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that the big problem that I always hear a lot of people talk about, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about it at all, is the length. And I think the indulgence ties into that for sure, at least for me. You know, I'm watching this and I'm seeing, okay, I don't need to see all of these scenes of him hanging out with other comedians. I don't need to see every person who Judd Apatow called up out of his little black book and was like, hey, listen, Norm, I need you to come hang out for a second. Yeah. Sarah Silverman, I need you to come hang out for a hot second. Oh, Eminem, you can do it too? Sure, why not? We'll throw you in. But I don't know exactly like if cutting any of that out would change the look of the movie for me, because I feel like overall it's hard to figure out where I would cut stuff out of this movie. I know it needs to be cut. I know it needs editing down. But I don't know what to do. Like, what would you do? Where would you tweak and nip and tuck on this movie?
Yeah, I think that the endings, like the third act, like where they're spending the time in Sonoma County, I feel like that is entirely too long. Mm-hmm. That's like a big spot that I would whittle away time at. I mean, it's great to see the kids. I always love seeing Iris and her name is and Maud. Like, I love the Apatow kids, but it's just a little bit much for me. Like, that whole in Sonoma County is just very long. And I would definitely cut down a little bit on the cameos as well. You get the same effect with 2 people as you do with like the 4 or 5 that it shows in one batch.
Right. Like
Ray Romano and Eminem are 2 of the most famous people for very different reasons. Mm-hmm. And that interaction was very funny, and it gave Eminem something to do. But at the same time, I was like, I could have done without this like 2-minute scene.
Right.
It's just like little things like that where it's like a joke run, you know, a banter going back and forth. And then it's like, maybe we stopped 2 jokes ago. Just shaving time off of.
That's Apatow for you, though. Apatow always leaves it in 2 or 3 jokes past when it goes. He does. I wish that Judd Apatow would do the thing in his movies that you know to do as a comic or a sketch writer or anything, where you leave it in until it becomes unfunny and then wait for it to become funny again.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the scenes always just peter off instead of going back around to where they can be funny again.
Yeah, they don't always end on the highest joke either, which again is that Apatow thing. It is a drag out for sure.
So yeah, but the performances kind of like they elevate the movie for sure, but you can't help writing like that other than just through editing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weird.
There's a Patton Oswalt joke about like male directors and female editors. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar?
I think I've heard this joke before, but I don't remember the specifics of it.
He's basically like, male editors go out and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then the female editors come in and are like, okay, go lay down, thank you, I'll make it into a story now. And I feel like the editing is very indulgent always, and it could be cleaned up some.
Yes.
In all of his films. And I love all of his films. But there is definitely some tightening that could happen.
Yeah, certainly in this movie. I think that there's a lot of... I mean, there's stuff that I know was cut, right? I know Brody Stevens was cut out of Funny People. Mm-hmm. Because he talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff in here that I think... You know, I'm looking through the plot line, right? And for looking at the plot, George gets diagnosed with leukemia. He starts doing stand-up again. He has his meeting, his fateful meeting at the Comedy and Magic Club with Ira. By the way, if Ira's getting spots at Comedy and Magic Club, good job. You don't need to be sad about getting spots at Comedy and Magic Club, Ira. And also, everybody gets paid at Comedy and Magic Club. I know this now, all right? Aziz Ansari, I know. I've learned. Anyway, I think you keep all of that, but all of the stuff in between... I don't need. Frankly, I don't think you need a whole lot of the stuff with Jason Schwartzman at all.
Totally agree. The whole Jason Schwartzman plotline could have been cut, and he could have just been, I'm a sitcom star who had space on my couch for my buddy.
Right.
I don't need to see any of the hey teach scenes.
Mm-hmm. Don't need that. I love Bo Burnham.
Need it. Don't need it.
Also, I hate to say it, don't need Aubrey Plaza in this movie.
Again, she's just kind of like an object. Mm-hmm. And like, we got to see her do stand-up once, which was neat.
Right.
Like, her character do stand-up once, which was neat. But, yeah, it's just all a little too much.
I remember... so many of the parts of this movie that I liked were the parts that was like, all right, we're going to see them palling around and doing comedy together, and you feel like you get to live that dream. And then it takes its turn into him trying to fix his life and become part of being around normal people again. And I think that if you really found a way to keep that heart of the movie, mm-hmm. then it would work. It's and I don't know if I'm saying that just because I've been around comedy so long now that like mm-hmm. I don't need to see people doing comedy in a movie the way that I used to.
Right.
Like,
and stand-up for movies is always so interesting and so like particled off.
Yes.
You know, it's like stand-up in movies, it just never comes across 100%.
Right. Because it's always so quick.
It's so quick. It's played for like the most joke. I mean, it's just like they try to highlight, and you know that there's like so much more to it. Especially even as an audience member. Like there's so much more to it. It's just so interesting.
The part, I mean, I know that Judd Apatow is, you know, he started out doing stand-up and he came back into it, and he's got a big love for stand-up comedy, and I imagine that's part of why he made not just this, but several other stories about stand-up comedians. But watching that scene at Comedy Magic Club where it's after Adam Sandler's character George bombs because he's talking about death and not being funny about it. And then Seth Rogen goes on and he's bombing with his jokes, and then he starts doing pretty well with riffing and sort of crowd work. And then he finishes his set. You hear his set end after he's like, I'm going to do it for 10 minutes. And then he does 2 minutes. And then he says, thank you, good night. And then Adam Sandler's character's in the parking lot goes, hey, you're funny. You're a good writer. But none of that was written.
Yeah. Yeah, the stuff that he wrote bombed.
It was bad. I would not hire Seth Rogen. I would not hire Ira Wright based on how his actual written jokes did.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of comes like full circle at the end when he's got like Punch Up for him, where he's like, when they reconcile and he's got the jokes like punching him up, and it's supposed to show this like healed and this arc of George's character and how he is going to be a more normal, grounded person, and he is going to help the little guy, but it just doesn't. I just don't feel like the growth arc was completed. Yeah,
I agree with you there. What do you think could have happened to make that arc feel like it actually occurred?
Yeah, I think had he turned down Leslie Mann's character in some way, had it been his choice, not her choice, to end the relationship, I think like she rejected him, goes back to her marriage. So it's like, it doesn't end on his terms. It's handed to him. Had he done the mature thing and been like, no, I can't do this. Like, you are married. There are boundaries. Right. Like, I think if he would have said no, it would have felt like a more sincere arc to me.
Yeah. Well, because the way it plays out right now in the movie as it stands, the cancer or the leukemia diagnosis is the first big thing. And then he is told that he's put in remission. And, now that's the first big instance of like, I can continue to make a change because this thing was removed from me outside of my control. And then instead of taking control and making the choice to turn her down, he just allows something else in his life to be removed from him outside of his control instead of doing the actual mature thing and making the hard choice. God. You hit the nail on the head, Erika.
Yeah.
I will say, I watching it again, I did really, really appreciate the punch-up scenes even more than I did previously. Because that's the stuff that I like the most about doing comedy now is hanging out with other comedians, and not just insufferable ones who I don't want to be around, like the roommates, like Jonah Hill and Jason Schwartzman. I hated those guys. I would absolutely not hang out with those guys if I was a real comedian in that movie. But I love a scene where you're sitting around punching up jokes, and I love hanging out and punching up stuff with other comics. Even if I don't like them, I can still think they're funny, and that's the best part. I think that's some of the best parts is when you get a joke from somebody who you think is funny and you might not like, and then it's like, you do care a little bit. You care just enough.
There's that universal like language or bond that comics have. Like,
it's the camaraderie.
It's that camaraderie. I want to see you succeed, even if I think you suck. Because if you succeed, like when there's a big ship in the harbor, all the little ships go up.
Mm-hmm.
If you make somebody laugh, like that kind of turns comedy into like a good thing. I don't know. That's kind of how I think
you're spot on. I know there are a lot of people who view comedy as a competition.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time in my life when I thought that too. And more lately, I've come to really accept that it is something that we're all in together. The rising tide does lift all the ships. You know, there's room for everybody at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to go. Sometimes you do wind up having to go to a different table because the one you're at might not be full of people you want to hang out with anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But comedy's a big fucking lunchroom. There's a lot of tables you can eat at. It's not.
There's a lot of audiences.
Yes.
Yeah. There's not one way to do it.
There isn't. There's a lot of ways to do it, and I do think that that element I think was captured well in this movie. I just wish that maybe I wish that it's the coming of age for middle-aged people. That's really what it is. Now now I'm thinking, I'm like, this doesn't conceptually it doesn't really work.
Yeah, Ira's a little bit older. Like, had Seth been much younger,
mm-hmm.
I think it would have had a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But in this movie, he's at least mid-30s. Mm-hmm. But Seth Rogen is kind of ageless in a way. Like, since he was been a kid, he's looked like he was 35.
That's true, yeah. You've seen that tape of him when he was like 19 doing a stand-up, right?
Yeah.
Ugh. Poor guy. I mean, that's the thing, though, too. It's like, I'm looking at one of the things that occurred to me while we were talking is, would this movie work if it was flipped with Jonah Hill, who I think is more obviously younger, mm-hmm. both as a character and as a human being, than Seth Rogen is in this movie? And I don't know if it quite would. Like, I know that Jonah Hill is a really great actor,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think that like Jonah Hill at this time was ready for a role like what Seth Rogen had to do here.
Right. There's a lot of heavy lifting that
mm-hmm.
had to be done. And this was the era before we knew like Moneyball Jonah Hill and more serious actor Jonah Hill.
Yeah. How many Oscars is Jonah Hill been nominated for? 2. Wow. Moneyball and Wolf of Wall Street. What about Seth Rogen? Seth Rogen, you got anything, bud?
A Critics' Choice Award, maybe?
He did get nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Writing for a Variety Series for the Ali G Show. So there's that. He's got the Comedy Star of the Year. He got Canadian Comedy Person of the Year in the same year that this movie came out.
Well, there you go.
That's the spirit.
Suck on that, Jonah Hill.
Yeah, Jonah Hill didn't get that shit. I'll tell you what. I don't know. I really do hope that at some point, Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill have very different trajectories, but if they had flipped, I feel like Jonah Hill would have been on the trajectory that he's already on mm-hmm. even earlier. And I think that Seth Rogen will find some more of that success that he's found, because like I think he was still in the everyman sort of persona at this time.
Right.
I think if he's stepping out of it. See, there we go. That trucker agrees with me.
Honk honk, he agrees.
Yes. It's probably Seth out there driving that truck. He knows.
He's an everyman.
He is everyman. I wanna ask before we wrap things up. You know, we're both the comedians. We've been around comedy for a while. We've seen a lot of stuff that people have made about comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Judd Apatow does a lot of that. And Funny People doesn't quite work. Like, I think I still enjoyed Funny People. It's lower for me than it was when I first watched it. But I do think that it's hard to make movies about people who are, comedy is hard to say it's an art, but it's about people who are artists, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's some like nothing comes to mind immediately, but I wanted to see if people wanted to watch a movie that does justice to like what this movie could have been, whether that's a movie about an artist who does have that growth that unfortunately George never gets to have in this movie, or even just a movie where somebody gets to change and really change instead of get so close to being able to change, but the arc never fully go. Where would you direct people to watch instead?
Oh, that's a really great question. I'm honestly racking my brain to think of any arc that I've kind of seen lately. I'm going to throw it back to another Seth Rogen movie, American Pickle.
Oh yeah, the HBO Max movie.
The HBO Max movie. I feel like the arc was pretty much completed in that film. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if you saw it, but
I did not. No.
A man gets basically pickled for 100 years, comes out in modern day Brooklyn, and his like great grandson is his, trying to teach him the ways of the world, but like who really learns is the great grandson and the pickler, the old man. Mm-hmm. There's like an arc there. And I think they both kind of complete it nicely. Like there is growth in that film. Okay. And that's what I would say. American Pickle.
American Pickle. I'll have to check that out then.
Yeah, it's a good little Seth completionist flick.
Oh yeah, for all the Seth Rogen completionists out there. The only Seth Rogen movie I just saw because Sausage Party's on here. The only Seth Rogen movie I watched lately at all before this was Long Shot.
That's a great flick.
Yeah. I mean, I love Charlize Theron can really, in my mind, do no wrong. Mm-mm. But that movie really, I think, does a very nice job of using Seth Rogen's persona well, but also allowing the characters to grow in a way that doesn't feel like so tropey rom-com-y. There's enough surprise in there, which is good. And and for the other flip side of it, for the coming of age side, I will say people I think should still go and watch King of Staten Island, because Pete Davidson and Belle Powley and Marissa Tomei and Bill Burr, they're all really great actors, but they actually allow Pete Davidson's story to be the main thing. And it makes sense for there to finally be a coming of age story made by Judd Apatow that's actually about a young person who has to come of age. Right. Instead of just shed the man-child persona.
Oh, I think I might watch it today or tomorrow, because like now I'm very intrigued, because I liked what I saw. I just was kind of in and out running errands while it was playing in the living room.
Give it a watch. And Belle Powley really is just on another level in that movie too. She's so great in it. I can't wait to. I've heard great things about her other movies, but I think she's going to be really on a nice trajectory over the next couple of years. Erika, I am both happy and sad that I watched Funny People again because of you, and found new wrinkles and a bit of a dislike for it, but it's nice to chop it up with another comic. Yeah. I'm so happy to have watched it again. I was staring at like the DVDs that we had. That was like and I locked eyes with Funny People, and I was like, that's the one I got to talk about. Well, I'm glad that we got there. And if the listeners want to find you and what you do, where can they go?
They can go to Trashy Podcast, Trashy Pod on Instagram and Twitter. We drop new episodes every Monday. We talk about garbage people and trashy news stories. And then you can find me on Instagram at iconic Erika Curry. It's kind of a spoof on being an influencer. I don't actually think I'm an icon yet, but
well, listen, it's all about faking it till you make it, and that's how you get there. You can find me at Diet J on Twitter and Instagram. And if you like the show, tell a friend, leave a review, and consider subscribing on Patreon, where you get extra bonus episodes and access to other cool stuff like Blockbusting Film Club. And jlightcomedy.com for all show dates live streamed. And that's it, folks. Enjoy. I hope you had a nice 2021, 2020, whatever. I don't care. Thanks again, Erika.
Thank you.
This has been Blockbusting. Go see something good for a change.